The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Le Cheval Blanc, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floors. Maya Johnson pushed through the heavy staff entrance door, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the pristine surface. She was early, as always. Being early meant she could take a moment to breathe in the silence before the chaos of another Saturday service began. At 28 years old, Maya had worked at this restaurant for 3 years. 3 long years of carrying heavy trays, memorizing complicated wine lists, and smiling through the exhaustion that settled deep in her bones. The restaurant wasn't just any place. It was one of Manhattan's most exclusive dining establishments, where a single appetizer cost more than Maya made in an entire shift. She tied her crisp white apron around her waist and checked her reflection in the staff room mirror. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly into a bun, not a strand out of place. Her uniform was spotless, pressed to perfection. In this world of wealth and privilege, appearance was everything. The customers who walked through those doors expected perfection, and Maya had learned to deliver it even when her feet ached and her smile felt like a mask. The restaurant itself was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, catching the light and scattering rainbows across the cream-colored walls. White tablecloths draped over each table, set with silverware that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, their sweet fragrance mixing with the smell of expensive cologne and fine wine. But what caught Maya's attention every single day was the grand piano sitting in the corner of the main dining room. It was a magnificent Steinway, black and gleaming, positioned perfectly so that everyone in the restaurant could see it. The restaurant only brought in professional pianists for special occasions, birthdays of important clients, anniversary celebrations, corporate events where money flowed like water. Maya would find excuses to walk past it during her shifts. She'd pretend to adjust a nearby table setting or check on the flowers, but really, she just wanted to be close to it. Sometimes, when the restaurant was empty and she was setting up for service, she'd run her fingers along its smooth surface, never daring to open the lid and touch the keys. Her coworkers had noticed her fascination. "You play?" her friend and fellow server Lisa had asked her once. Maya had just smiled and shrugged, not wanting to get into it. How could she explain what music meant to her? How could she put into words the way her fingers still moved unconsciously whenever she heard a beautiful melody, as if playing invisible keys in the air? During the busy lunch service, when a recorded classical piece played softly through the speakers, Maya would find herself pausing mid-step. Her hands would twitch, her fingers remembering patterns and scales from a lifetime ago. She'd catch herself and quickly return to reality, to the weight of the tray in her hands and the impatient customer waiting for their check. The other servers were kind enough, but they didn't really see her. Not the real her. They saw Maya the waitress, reliable and quiet, someone who showed up on time and never complained. They didn't know about the dreams she still carried, hidden away like precious gems she couldn't afford to lose. The customers saw even less. To them, Maya was invisible until they needed something. A refill on their water glass, another basket of bread, the bill. She was part of the restaurant's elegant backdrop, like the paintings on the walls or the flowers on the tables. They looked through her, not at her. She'd learned to accept this invisibility. It was easier that way, less painful. When you're invisible, people's rudeness doesn't sting quite as much. When they snapped their fingers at her or called her sweetheart in that condescending tone, she could let it roll off her back. She needed this job. The money wasn't great, but the tips from wealthy customers helped her save, slowly building toward a future she wasn't quite sure of yet. Every night, Maya would count her tips in the staff room before heading home to her tiny studio apartment in Queens. She kept a jar under her bed where she deposited most of her earnings, watching it fill bit by bit. She didn't let herself think too much about what the money was for. Dreams felt dangerous when you'd already lost so much, but music had a way of sneaking back into her life no matter how hard she tried to keep it at bay. On her days off, she'd sometimes find herself walking past music stores, pressing her nose against the glass to look at the instruments inside. She'd attend free concerts in the park during summer, sitting on the grass with her eyes closed, letting the melodies wash over her like rain. Her apartment building had a beat-up old keyboard that someone had left in the common room. Sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep, Maya would sneak down there and play quietly, her fingers remembering things her mind had tried to forget. She'd play until her hands hurt, until the ache in her chest felt a little less heavy. The other residents never complained. Once an elderly neighbor had stopped in the doorway to listen. When Maya finished and turned around, embarrassed at being caught, the woman had tears in her eyes. "That was beautiful, dear," she'd said softly. "Don't ever stop playing." But Maya always did stop. She'd lock up the keyboard and return to her apartment, to the practical world of bills and rent and survival. Working at Le Cheval Blanc was a constant reminder of the life she might have had. She'd serve wealthy families who talked casually about their children's piano lessons, about recitals and music camps that cost thousands of dollars. She'd overhear conversations about symphony performances and opera nights, events that happened in a world she no longer belonged to. Yet somehow, she kept showing up. Day after day, shift after shift, she tied on her apron and smiled at customers who never really saw her. She moved through that beautiful restaurant like a ghost, present but not quite there, her mind often drifting to melodies only she could hear. The piano sat in the corner, silent most days, waiting. And Maya waited too, though she didn't know what for. She just knew that something inside her wasn't finished yet, some story that hadn't reached its ending. Every time she walked past that Steinway, every time her fingers twitched with muscle memory, every time she heard music and felt her heart skip a beat, she knew that part of her was still alive. That part of her that had once dreamed in music, that had once believed anything was possible, was still there. Buried deep, protected and hidden, but not dead. Not yet. And as Maya prepared for another busy Saturday night service, adjusting her apron one more time and taking a deep breath, she had no idea that everything was about to change. The evening service had just begun when the front doors of Le Cheval Blanc swung open with unnecessary force. Maya was arranging wine glasses at her station when she heard it. The loud, booming laugh that seemed to demand everyone's attention. She looked up to see a group of well-dressed people entering, led by a tall man in an expensive suit that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. His name was Richard Pemberton, though Maya wouldn't learn that until later. What she noticed first was the way he walked, like he owned every space he entered. His shoes clicked against the marble floor with sharp, deliberate sounds. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his perfectly styled silver hair to the huge watch on his wrist that caught the chandelier light. Behind him came 6 other people, all dressed in designer clothes, all wearing the same expression of bored sophistication. They talked loudly, their voices carrying across the quiet restaurant where other diners were trying to enjoy their meals in peace. The hostess, Claire, hurried forward with menus, her professional smile fixed in place despite the disruption. Maya watched from her station as the group made their way through the dining room. Richard stopped suddenly, looking around with exaggerated disappointment. "This table?" he said loudly, pointing at the perfectly good table Claire was leading them to. "You're putting me at this table? I specifically requested the corner spot." "Do you know who I am?" Poor Claire's smile wavered. "I apologize, sir, but that table is reserved for another party arriving at 8. This table has the exact same view and—" "I don't care about your other party," Richard interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Call them and tell them to come later. Or put them somewhere else. I want that table." He snapped his fingers like he was calling a dog. The restaurant manager, David, quickly appeared to smooth things over. Maya had seen this dance before. Wealthy customers made impossible demands, and the staff bent over backward to accommodate them because that's how fine dining worked. After a few minutes of quiet negotiation, David managed to rearrange the seating, and Richard's group settled at the corner table they'd demanded. Maya felt her stomach drop when David caught her eye and gestured toward the corner. She was being assigned to their section. Of course she was. Saturday nights were always unpredictable, but something about this group made her uneasy. She'd developed a 6th sense over the years, an ability to read customers, and this man radiated trouble. She approached the table with her notepad, her professional smile in place. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Richard didn't even look at her. He was too busy talking to the man next to him about some real estate deal, gesturing wildly with his hands. The others at the table were glued to their phones, scrolling and typing, equally oblivious to her presence. Maya stood there, waiting. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, she tried again. "Sir?" Would you like to hear about our cocktail specials this evening? This time Richard glanced up but not at her face. His eyes swept over her dismissively, the way you'd look at a piece of furniture. Martini. Extra dry. 3 olives. And make sure it's cold enough. Last time I was here, they served it practically room temperature. Maya had checked the records before the shift. He'd never been here before, but she didn't correct him. Of course, sir. And for everyone else? The orders came in a flurry, some people barely pausing their conversations to speak. They ordered the most expensive wines without looking at the prices, appetizers they probably wouldn't finish, cocktails made with rare liquors. Maya wrote everything down carefully, making sure to get every detail right. When she returned with the drinks, Richard was in the middle of a story. He was talking loudly enough that nearby tables couldn't help but overhear. So I told him, either you sell me the building at my price or I'll make sure no bank in this city ever loans to you again. And guess what? He sold. The group erupted in laughter. Maya set down his martini carefully. As she did, Richard suddenly shifted in his seat, and his elbow knocked against the glass, sending a splash of vodka onto the white tablecloth. Immediately, he turned to her with an expression of disgust. "Are you serious right now?" he said, his voice rising. "You just spilled my drink all over the table." Maya felt her face flush. "Sir, I had already set the glass down when— Are you arguing with me?" Richard cut her off, looking around at his companions with an expression of mock disbelief. "Is she actually arguing with me right now?" His friends chuckled, enjoying the show. "No, sir," Maya said quietly, her jaw tight. "Let me get you another drink and clean this up right away." "You better," Richard said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "And try not to bathe me in it this time, sweetheart." Maya hurried away, her hands shaking slightly as she grabbed clean napkins and ordered another martini from the bar. Lisa caught her eye from across the room and made a sympathetic face. Everyone could see what was happening. Everyone knew this customer was going to be difficult. The rest of the service was a nightmare. Nothing Maya did was right. The food came out too slow, even though the kitchen was moving as fast as possible. The wine was too warm, then too cold. Richard sent back his steak twice, first because it was overcooked, and then because the replacement was undercooked, though both had been prepared exactly to the medium rare he'd ordered. But the worst part wasn't the complaints. It was the way he spoke to her. Every interaction was laced with condescension. Every request delivered like she was an idiot who needed simple instructions. He called her honey and sweetheart in a tone that made the words sound like insults. He snapped his fingers to get her attention even when she was clearly helping another table. His companions followed his lead, treating her with the same casual dismissal. They left messes for her to clean, dropped napkins on the floor and expected her to replace them immediately. Changed their orders multiple times just because they could. One woman complained that her water had too much ice, then complained when the replacement had too little. Maya maintained her composure through it all. She'd been trained for this, had dealt with difficult customers before. But there was something particularly cruel about this group. Something that went beyond normal rudeness. They seemed to enjoy making her job harder, seemed to take pleasure in watching her struggle to meet their impossible demands. At one point, Richard knocked his fork off the table. Instead of apologizing or even acknowledging it, he simply looked at Maya and raised his eyebrows, waiting. She quickly retrieved a clean fork, and he took it without a word of thanks, continuing his conversation as if she didn't exist. Other customers in the restaurant were starting to notice. Maya could feel their sympathetic glances, their uncomfortable awareness that something wasn't right at that corner table. But no one said anything. That's how it worked in places like this. The customer was always right, no matter how wrong they were. As the meal dragged on, Maya found herself counting down the minutes until they would leave. Her feet hurt, her face hurt from forcing the smile, and her pride was taking a beating. But she needed this job. She needed the money. So she kept going, kept serving, kept swallowing the small humiliations that came with every interaction. She had no idea that the worst was yet to come, that Richard's cruelty was just getting started, and that before this night was over, everything in her carefully controlled life was about to completely fall apart. The group had been drinking for over 2 hours. Empty wine bottles cluttered the table, and Richard's voice had grown progressively louder with each glass. Maya had lost count of how many times she'd refilled their drinks, how many courses they'd eaten, how many demands she'd fulfilled. She was beginning to hope they might actually leave soon when Richard suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He swayed slightly, steadying himself against the table. His face was flushed, his eyes bright with alcohol and something else. Something mean. He looked around the restaurant like a king surveying his kingdom, and then his gaze landed on the grand piano sitting silent in its corner. "What's the point of having a piano if nobody plays it?" he announced to the entire restaurant. His voice carried easily in the hushed space, and conversations at nearby tables fell silent. People turned to look. David, the manager, appeared quickly at Richard's side, his expression carefully neutral. "The piano is for special occasions, sir. We have a professional pianist who performs during certain events." "Well, this is a special occasion," Richard declared, throwing his arms wide. "I'm here, aren't I?" His friends laughed, raising their glasses in agreement. "I apologize, sir, but our pianist actually canceled this evening due to illness," David explained patiently. "We'd be happy to play some recorded music if you'd like." Richard made a face like he'd tasted something bitter. "Recorded music? What is this, a shopping mall?" He turned to his companions. "Can you believe this place? They call themselves fine dining, but they can't even provide live entertainment." Maya was clearing glasses from a nearby table, trying to stay invisible, trying not to draw attention. But she could feel it coming, the way you can feel a storm building before the first drops of rain fall. There was a cruel energy in the air, and she was directly in its path. Richard's eyes swept across the restaurant, looking for something, someone. And then they landed on her. His face lit up with a smile that made Maya's blood run cold. "What about her?" he said, pointing directly at Maya. "I bet even the waitress could play something. How hard can it be, right? Just hit some keys and make some noise." His friends burst into laughter. One of them, a woman with too much jewelry, actually clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, Richard, you're terrible," she said. But she was smiling, enjoying the spectacle. Maya felt every eye in the restaurant turned toward her. Her hands froze on the tray she was holding. Her heart started pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't happening. David stepped forward, trying to intervene. "Sir, I assure you our staff are trained in service, not entertainment. If you'd like, I can arrange for—" "I wasn't talking to you," Richard cut him off, his eyes still fixed on Maya. "You, waitress, come here." Maya's feet moved before her brain could tell them not to. Years of training, of always obeying customer requests, pulled her forward. She approached the table slowly, the tray still in her hands like a shield. "Yes, sir?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Richard pulled out his wallet with exaggerated slowness. He made a show of flipping through the bills, finally pulling out a $100 bill. He held it up so everyone could see, waving it slightly in the air. "Tell you what, sweetheart," he said, and the restaurant was so quiet now that everyone could hear every word. "You go over there and play us a little song on that fancy piano, and this 100 is yours. Easy money, right?" He grinned at his friends. "Maybe she can play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or something." The group erupted in laughter again. The sound felt like needles against Maya's skin. She stood there frozen, as the humiliation washed over her in waves. This was it. This was the moment she'd been dreading for 3 years. The moment when all the small indignities finally added up to something she couldn't ignore, couldn't smile through, couldn't pretend didn't hurt. "Come on," Richard pressed, waving the money. "Don't be shy. We're all friends here. Just give us a little tune. How hard can it be? You see people playing it all the time, right? Just bang on those keys a little bit." Maya's vision had narrowed to a tunnel. She could see Richard's smirking face, could see his friends watching with expressions ranging from amusement to mild discomfort. She could feel the weight of every other person in the restaurant watching, waiting to see what she would do. Some of them probably felt sorry for her. Some of them probably thought this was entertaining. None of them were going to help her. That's not how this world worked. The wealthy man with the money made the rules, and people like Maya just had to deal with it. David tried one more time. "Sir, I really must insist that we don't disturb our other guests. If you'd like, I can offer you a complimentary dessert and—" "I don't want dessert," Richard said, his voice hardening. "I want entertainment, and I'm willing to pay for it." He turned back to Maya, his eyes cold despite the smile on his face. "What's the problem?" $100 for 5 minutes of work. That's better than you make in a week, isn't it?" One of his friends, a younger man in a designer suit, leaned over. "Rich, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Tyler," Richard snapped. I'm making a point here. He looked back at Maya. You see, this is the problem with people today. No work ethic. Here I am, offering good money for a simple task, and she's just standing there like I asked her to climb Mount Everest. Maya felt something shift inside her. It was like a door opening or maybe a wall cracking. She'd spent 3 years making herself small, making herself invisible, swallowing every insult and indignity because that's what you did to survive. But standing here with this cruel man waving money in her face like she was a trained animal who would perform for treats, something in her refused to stay small anymore. The piano sat in the corner, the beautiful Steinway she'd admired from afar for so long. The piano she'd never dared to touch because it wasn't for people like her. The piano that represented everything she'd lost and everything she'd given up. And this man, this terrible man, wanted to use it to humiliate her, wanted to watch her fumble through some children's song while he and his friends laughed. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya Johnson had forgotten more about music than most people ever learned. That her fingers remembered things her mind had tried to bury, that inside her lived a musician who had been silent for too long, and who was suddenly fiercely tired of being invisible. I'll play, Maya heard herself say. The words came out clear and strong, surprising even her. Richard's smile widened. Now we're talking. See, that wasn't so hard. He held out the $100 bill. Maya looked at the money. She looked at his smug face. She looked at his friends, already pulling out their phones to record what they thought would be an embarrassing performance. She looked at the other restaurant guests, some looking away uncomfortably, others watching with morbid curiosity. And then she looked at the piano. Her piano, because the moment she'd agreed to play it, it became hers. She reached out, but not for the money. Instead, she took the $100 bill from Richard's hand, looked him directly in the eyes, and handed it back to him. I'll play, she said again, her voice steady and calm, but not for your money. Not for you at all. Richard's smile faltered for just a second, confusion flickering across his face. What? But Maya was already walking away, moving toward the piano with purpose. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. From something else. From possibility. From the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that she was about to do something that couldn't be undone. Something that would change everything. The restaurant held its breath as she sat down at the bench. Maya's earliest memory wasn't of a face or a place. It was of sound. The sound of music drifting through the thin walls of their apartment building in Detroit. She was 4 years old, and the melody pulled at something deep inside her, something she didn't have words for yet. She'd followed that sound down the stairs, her small hand gripping the railing, until she found its source. The community room on the first floor held an old upright piano, battered and out of tune, pushed against the wall like an afterthought. An elderly neighbor, Mr. Patterson, sat at the bench playing a simple folk song. He looked up when Maya appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with wonder. Want to try? He'd asked kindly. Maya had nodded, unable to speak. When her small fingers touched the keys for the first time, something inside her clicked into place. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. Mr. Patterson showed her middle C, showed her how to make a simple scale. Within a week, she was spending every afternoon in that community room, learning everything he could teach her. Her mother, Patricia, worked 2 jobs just to keep them fed and housed. She left before Maya woke up and came home long after dinner time, exhausted to the bone. But when Mr. Patterson told her about Maya's gift, something lit up in Patricia's tired eyes. Hope, maybe, or recognition that her daughter had found something precious. Patricia started working extra shifts, saving every penny she could. On Maya's 7th birthday, she came home with a used electronic keyboard. It wasn't much, the keys didn't feel right and the sound was tinny, but Maya cried when she saw it. She practiced on that keyboard for hours every day, teaching herself to read music from library books, playing along with videos she found online. By the time she was 7, Maya was performing in local church recitals. People would stop talking when she played. They'd turn to watch this tiny child pull impossibly beautiful sounds from whatever instrument she could get her hands on. Teachers at her school started noticing. One of them, Mrs. Chen, made phone calls, wrote letters, pulled strings. When Maya was 10 years old, she auditioned for the Detroit School of Arts. She played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, her small hands stretching to reach the chords. The panel of judges sat in stunned silence when she finished. 3 days later, the acceptance letter arrived with a full scholarship. Those were golden years. Maya soaked up knowledge like a sponge. She learned theory and composition, technique and interpretation. She practiced until her hands ached, then practiced some more. Music wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. Every emotion she couldn't express in words came pouring out through the keys. At 12, she won the Michigan Young Artists Competition. The prize was a performance with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. Maya still remembered standing in that vast concert hall, looking out at the sea of faces, feeling the weight of the orchestra behind her. She played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet and the applause felt like thunder. Teachers started talking about her future. Juilliard, they said. Curtis Institute. Conservatories that accepted only the most exceptional talents. Maya dreamed big dreams. She imagined herself performing in concert halls around the world, her fingers dancing across keys in Moscow, Vienna, New York. She imagined making her mother proud, giving her a life where she wouldn't have to work herself to exhaustion. Everything changed when Maya was 17, in her senior year of high school. Patricia had been feeling tired, more tired than usual. She'd been losing weight, getting headaches that wouldn't go away. Maya had begged her to see a doctor, but doctors cost money they didn't have, and Patricia kept saying she just needed more rest. By the time they finally made it to the emergency room, the cancer had already spread. Stage 4, the doctor said, his face grave. Pancreatic cancer. Aggressive and fast-moving. 6 months, maybe less. The acceptance letter from Juilliard arrived on the same day they got Patricia's diagnosis. Full scholarship, it said. We are delighted to offer you a place in our incoming class. Maya held that letter in her hands and felt her entire future collapse. Juilliard was in New York. Patricia was in Detroit, getting sicker every day. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Maya wrote a letter thanking them for the opportunity, but explaining that she needed to decline. She didn't tell them why. She just said circumstances had changed. Her teachers were heartbroken. Mrs. Chen actually cried when Maya told her. "This is your dream," she said. "Your mother would want you to go." But Maya shook her head. "My mother needs me more than I need Juilliard." Those next 6 months were the hardest of Maya's life. She watched her strong, tireless mother become weak and frail. She held her hand through chemotherapy sessions that made her violently sick. She cleaned and cooked and tried to keep their tiny apartment feeling like a home. And when Patricia died on a rainy Tuesday in March, 3 weeks before Maya's 18th birthday, something inside Maya died too. She couldn't play anymore. Every time she sat at a piano, all she could think about was her mother, about the sacrifices Patricia had made, about the future that would never happen now. The music that had once flowed so naturally felt blocked, like trying to breathe underwater. She lasted 2 months at a community college, trying to study business because it seemed practical, because she needed to think about survival now, not dreams. But the money ran out quickly. The small savings Patricia had left wasn't enough. The apartment they'd rented for 15 years was suddenly too expensive without her mother's income. Maya moved to a cheaper place, then a cheaper place still. She took a job at a diner, then a better restaurant, learning to smile and serve and make herself invisible. She told herself it was temporary, that she'd save up and figure things out. But months turned into years, and the music became something that belonged to a different life, a different version of herself. She'd tried a few times to play again. There was always a piano somewhere, a church, a community center, that old keyboard in her current apartment building's common room. But every time her fingers touched the keys, the grief came rushing back so strongly it felt like drowning. So she stopped trying. She locked that part of herself away and focused on surviving, one shift at a time. Sometimes, late at night, she'd dream about performing. She'd dream she was back on that stage with the symphony, the music flowing through her effortlessly, the audience spellbound. Then she'd wake up in her tiny studio apartment and the dream would fade like morning mist, leaving only an ache behind. Working at Le Cheval Blanc had been torture in a way. Being surrounded by that beautiful piano, hearing classical music play softly through the speakers, serving wealthy families who talked casually about their children's music lessons like it was nothing special. But it was also the closest she could get to that world anymore, and some broken part of her needed that proximity, even if it hurt. She'd told herself she was fine with how things had turned out. She'd made her peace with it. She'd chosen her mother, and she'd do it again without hesitation. The music was gone, but that was okay. People gave up dreams all the time. That was just life. But sitting at that Steinway now, her hands hovering over the keys, Maya realized she'd been lying to herself. The music wasn't gone. It had been there all along, waiting. And all the grief, all the loss, all the years of silence were about to pour out of her in a way that would shake the foundations of this elegant restaurant and everyone in it. The walk from Richard's table to the piano felt like it took forever and no time at all. Maya was aware of every eye following her, every held breath in the restaurant. Behind her, she could hear Richard already making comments to his friends, probably preparing more jokes for when she failed. But something strange was happening inside her. The fear that had gripped her moments ago was melting away, replaced by something else entirely, a kind of calm certainty, like the moment before a storm when the air goes still. She'd spent 10 years running from this, from music, from the part of herself that hurt too much to touch, and now, forced into this corner by a cruel man's entertainment, she was about to stop running. The piano bench was exactly the right height. Of course it was. Everything in Le Cheval Blanc was perfect, measured, precise. Maya sat down and let her hands rest on her lap for a moment. The last time she'd played a real piano, a piano like this, she'd been 17 years old, performing in a high school recital just weeks before her mother got sick. She'd played Chopin that night too. Her fingers trembled as she lifted them toward the keys. For a terrifying second, she thought they might not remember. What if the muscle memory was gone? What if 10 years of silence had erased everything she'd once known? What if she sat here and couldn't play at all, and Richard's cruel joke turned out to be exactly right? But then her fingers touched the keys, and it was like touching a live wire. Every nerve in her body lit up. The piano was perfectly tuned, the keys responsive and smooth under her touch. This wasn't the battered upright from her childhood or the cheap keyboard in her apartment building. This was an instrument that could do justice to everything she was about to say. Maya closed her eyes for a moment. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her mother's face. Patricia, smiling at her from the audience of that concert with the symphony. Patricia, sick and weak but squeezing her hand and saying, "Play for me, baby. Play something beautiful." Patricia, who had died believing that Maya's gift shouldn't be wasted, even though Maya had chosen to waste it anyway. She opened her eyes. The restaurant stretched out before her, all those people waiting to see her fail or succeed. David stood near the kitchen, looking worried. Lisa was frozen mid-step with a tray of drinks. Richard sat at his corner table, leaning back with that smug smile, already savoring what he thought would be a humiliating performance. And suddenly, Maya knew exactly what she was going to play, and why. She wasn't playing for Richard or his money or his approval. She wasn't even playing for the audience, though they'd hear it. She was playing for her mother, for the girl she used to be, for every dream she'd buried and every piece of herself she'd denied. She was playing for the years of silence and the weight of grief and the simple, profound truth that music had never really left her at all. Her hands settled into position. The restaurant held its breath, and Maya began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from the piano like water. Soft at first, almost hesitant, like a voice remembering how to speak. Maya's fingers found the familiar patterns without conscious thought. The muscle memory was there, buried under years of disuse but intact. Perfect. Waiting for this moment. The first phrase unfolded, delicate and melancholic. This piece had always felt like a conversation to Maya, like someone telling a story in the dark. Her left hand created a gentle, rocking accompaniment while her right hand sang the melody. Each note placed with careful precision. She felt her body relax into the music, her shoulders dropping, her breathing deepening. This was right. This was home. How had she stayed away so long? How had she convinced herself she could live without this? The melody climbed and descended, each phrase building on the last. Maya's fingers moved faster now, more confident. The nocturne required a delicate touch, subtle shifts in dynamics that could make the difference between beautiful and merely competent. Her hands remembered this too. The gentle swells, the moments of tender emphasis, the way certain notes needed to ring just a little longer. She was barely aware of the restaurant anymore. In her mind, she was 17 again, playing this same piece for her mother. Patricia had loved Chopin. She'd said his music sounded like longing, like beautiful sadness, It's okay to be sad sometimes, she'd told Maya once. Sad can be beautiful too. The middle section of the nocturne grew more complex, the left hand's accompaniment becoming more elaborate, while the right hand wove increasingly intricate melodic lines. Maya's hands crossed and recrossed, her fingers flying across the keys with practiced precision. It was technical, yes, but it was also deeply emotional. Every note carried meaning, carried feeling. Around her, the restaurant had fallen into absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens when people forget to breathe. Waiters had stopped mid-service. Diners had put down their forks. Even the kitchen staff had crept to the doorway to listen. This wasn't what anyone had expected. This wasn't a waitress fumbling through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This was a concert performance, professional, masterful, the kind of playing that doesn't happen by accident, that comes only from years of serious training and natural gift. Every person in that restaurant could hear it, even if they couldn't name exactly what made it special. They could feel the difference between someone who knew how to play and someone who knew how to make music speak. At his corner table, Richard's smug smile had completely disappeared. His face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open. His friends had stopped laughing. One of them had pulled out their phone and was recording, but not for the mocking video they'd planned. This was something worth capturing. Maya felt tears building behind her closed eyes, but she didn't try to stop them. Let them come. This was 10 years of grief pouring out through her fingers. 10 years of loss and sacrifice and buried dreams. 10 years of being invisible, being less than she was, denying the most fundamental part of her identity. The nocturne moved into its final section, the melody returning to its opening theme but transformed now, deepened by everything that had come before. Maya's touch on the keys was so gentle that the notes seemed to hover in the air like hummingbirds. She shaped each phrase with exquisite care, building toward the final resolution. The last notes faded into silence. Actual silence this time. Not the comfortable background noise of a restaurant, but the profound quiet that follows great art. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The final chord hung in the air like a question. Then Maya's hands moved again, not away from the keys, but into a new position. Because Chopin was just the beginning. She'd spent 10 years silent. 10 years small, 10 years pretending she was less than she was. One beautiful nocturne wasn't enough to contain everything she needed to say. She was just getting started. And she was about to show everyone in Le Cheval Blanc, especially the arrogant man who'd tried to humiliate her, exactly who Maya Johnson really was. Without pausing, without giving anyone time to react or applaud, Maya's hands shifted position on the keys. What came next wasn't gentle or delicate. It was fire. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor crashed through the restaurant like thunder. Dark, powerful, demanding. The contrast to Chopin's tender nocturne was shocking, deliberate. Maya wanted them to understand the full range of what they were hearing, wanted to shatter any remaining doubt about who was sitting at this piano. Her hands moved with fierce precision across the keyboard. The Rachmaninoff Prelude was one of the most technically demanding pieces in classical piano repertoire, famous for being simultaneously beautiful and punishing. It required massive hands to reach some of the chord spans, incredible strength to produce the fortissimo sections, and absolute control to navigate the delicate passages without losing the thread of emotion. Maya had learned it when she was 15. Her teacher had warned her it might be too ambitious, but Maya had been stubborn even then. She'd practiced until her hands cramped, until she could play it in her sleep. And now, after 10 years, her hands still remembered every note, every dynamic, every accent that made this piece come alive. The main theme pounded out like a heartbeat, insistent and urgent. Her left hand created a relentless rhythmic foundation, while her right hand carved out the melody in heavy chords. The Steinway's rich bass notes filled the restaurant, vibrating through the floor and up through people's chairs. This wasn't background music. This was impossible to ignore. Maya felt something breaking open inside her chest. All the anger she'd suppressed over the years, all the frustration of serving people who treated her like she was invisible, all the resentment at a world that valued wealth over talent, all of it poured out through her fingers. She played harder, louder, letting the music say everything she'd never been allowed to voice. The piece built in intensity, climbing higher and higher. Her hands flew up and down the keyboard, leaping across octaves, her fingers striking the keys with controlled fury. Sweat began to form on her forehead, but she didn't care. Her whole body was engaged now, swaying slightly with the music, using her weight to drive the powerful passages. People in the restaurant sat frozen, some with their hands pressed to their chests, physically affected by the intensity of what they were hearing. This wasn't just technically proficient. This was emotionally devastating. You could hear everything in it: rage and sorrow, triumph and despair, the full complicated weight of being human. At the corner table, one of Richard's friends had tears streaming down her face. Another man sat with his head bowed, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Richard himself looked like he'd been physically struck, all color drained from his face, his earlier arrogance completely shattered. The middle section of the prelude shifted, becoming softer, more introspective. Maya's touch lightened, her fingers dancing through the rapid passages with crystalline clarity. This section required a different kind of strength. The strength to pull back, to create intimacy and vulnerability after so much power. Her hands whispered across the keys, telling secrets, sharing pain. She thought about all the nights she'd lain awake in her studio apartment, listening to the city outside her window, feeling so alone. She thought about standing in front of music store windows, longing for something she thought was lost forever. She thought about her mother's funeral, how she hadn't been able to cry because if she started she might never stop. The music swelled again, building back toward the opening theme. Maya's hands crashed down on the keys, pulling everything together. Every thread of emotion woven into this final statement. The bass notes rumbled like an earthquake. The chords rang out clear and defiant, and then just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The final chord hung in the air, powerful and unresolved, like a question that would never be fully answered. The silence that followed was absolute. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her chest heaving from the physical exertion. She felt emptied out, like she'd poured her entire soul through those keys and left it hanging in the air for everyone to see. Slowly, she became aware of the restaurant again, of the people staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe, of David standing by the kitchen with tears openly streaming down his face, of Lisa clutching her tray so hard her knuckles had gone white. But Maya wasn't done. Not quite yet, because she'd shown them classical music, shown them technical mastery, shown them the depth of her training. Now she wanted to show them joy. Show them that music wasn't just about sadness and intensity, but also about freedom and playfulness and the pure pleasure of creation. Her hands shifted again, this time into a different position entirely. She began to play jazz. It started with a simple blues progression, basic and familiar, but then Maya began to improvise, her right hand spinning out melodic variations while her left hand laid down a walking bass line. She channeled Art Tatum, Thelonious Monk, Oscar Peterson, all the jazz greats she'd studied and loved. The music became playful, even cheeky. Maya's fingers danced across the keys in unexpected patterns, quoting classical themes and then twisting them into jazz riffs. She took a phrase from Beethoven and transformed it with swing rhythms. She grabbed a snippet of Bach and turned it into bebop. Her hands moved with joyful confidence, showing off now, having fun. A smile crept onto her face as she played. This was the part of music she'd almost forgotten, that it could be fun, that you could play with it, experiment, take risks, that not every note had to be perfect as long as the feeling was true. She built the improvisation into a frenzy, her hands racing across the keyboard in rapid runs and complex chord progressions. The restaurant was alive now, people swaying in their seats, some tapping their fingers or feet despite themselves. The energy had completely shifted from the heavy emotion of the Rachmaninoff to something lighter, brighter, more celebratory. Maya played a final, flourishing run up the entire length of the keyboard and ended with a triumphant chord, her hands coming down with perfect timing and a smile of pure joy on her face. This time, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the restaurant erupted. The applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet, shouting and cheering. David was applauding so hard his hands must have hurt. Lisa had set down her tray and was clapping with tears running down her face. Other staff members emerged from the kitchen, adding their voices to the ovation. Maya stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs, suddenly aware that her entire body was trembling. She'd just played more music in 15 minutes than she had in the last 10 years combined. She felt raw and exposed, and also somehow more alive than she'd felt in a decade. The applause continued, wave after wave of it. People were pulling out their phones, not to mock, but to capture this moment, to have proof that they'd witnessed something extraordinary. A woman at a nearby table was crying openly, her husband's arm around her shoulders. And in the corner, at Richard's table, there was only stunned silence. His friends were applauding, but Richard himself sat frozen, his face a mask of shock and something that might have been shame. But Maya wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes had found someone else, a distinguished Asian man at a table near the window, who had risen to his feet and was walking toward her with purposeful strides. The man approaching Maya looked to be in his 50s, with silver streaking through his dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind designer glasses. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind of presence that comes from years of accomplishment rather than arrogance. As he drew closer, Maya noticed that other diners were watching him with recognition, whispering to each other. "That was extraordinary," he said when he reached her, his voice warm and sincere. He extended his hand. "James Chen. I'm the artistic director of the New York Philharmonic." Maya's hand went to her mouth. The New York Philharmonic, one of the most prestigious orchestras in the world. She'd dreamed of performing with them once a lifetime ago. She took his offered hand, barely able to believe this was happening. "Maya Johnson," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from emotion. "Maya," James repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "I've been coming to this restaurant for years, and I've heard dozens of professional pianists play that instrument. What you just did was beyond anything I've witnessed here." He paused, studying her face. "You have formal training. Extensive training. Where did you study?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. All the old pain came rushing back. The dreams she'd abandoned. The future she'd given up. She swallowed hard. "Detroit School of Arts," she said quietly. "I was accepted to Juilliard, but I couldn't attend. Personal circumstances." Understanding flickered across James's face. He didn't push for details. "And since then, have you been performing elsewhere?" "Teaching?" Maya shook her head, suddenly ashamed. "I've been here, working. I haven't really played in 10 years. James's eyebrows shot up. 10 years? You haven't played seriously in a decade and you just performed like that? He looked genuinely stunned. That's remarkable. That's beyond remarkable. Do you understand what that means? Before Maya could answer, the restaurant erupted in another wave of applause. More people had pulled out their phones. Maya could see recording lights, could hear people talking excitedly about posting videos online. The moment was being captured, shared, sent out into the digital world where it would take on a life of its own. David appeared at Maya's elbow, his face flushed with excitement and concern. "Maya, I had no idea. In 3 years, I never knew you could play like that." "Neither did I," Lisa added, appearing on her other side. "Girl, you've been hiding some serious talent." James pulled a business card from his wallet and pressed it into Maya's hand. "I want you to call me, soon. We have a concert series next month featuring undiscovered talent, musicians who deserve to be heard. I'd like you to audition." Maya stared at the card, elegant and simple, embossed with the New York Philharmonic logo. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. She was a waitress. She was invisible. She was nobody. "I don't know if I can," she started to say. "You just did," James interrupted gently. "Whatever happened 10 years ago, whatever made you stop, I'm sorry for it. But that gift you have doesn't disappear. It's still there. You just proved that to everyone in this room." He gestured around the restaurant. "Call me. Please, the world should hear you play." As James returned to his table, Maya stood there feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. The applause was finally dying down, people returning to their meals, but the energy in the restaurant had completely changed. Diners kept glancing at her, smiling, a few giving her thumbs up. A young woman approached shyly. "Excuse me, but I just posted your performance on social media. I hope that's okay." "It's already getting thousands of views." Maya's head spun. "Posted online? Thousands of views?" She'd been invisible for so long, and now suddenly people were seeing her, really seeing her. "The waitress who silenced the arrogant millionaire," another diner said, showing her his phone screen where he'd already uploaded a video with that exact caption. "This is going to go viral. You're amazing." Through all of this, Maya hadn't looked back at Richard's table, but now she did, finally allowing herself to see his reaction. He sat alone, His friends had scattered, some to talk to other diners, some checking their phones, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Richard himself looked smaller somehow, diminished. The smug confidence had evaporated completely. He stared down at his half-empty wine glass, his face pale and his jaw tight. For a moment, Maya felt something almost like pity for him. He'd tried to humiliate her, to use her as entertainment for his cruel amusement. Instead, he'd given her a gift, forced her back to something she'd been running from for a decade. He'd meant to make her small, and instead he'd reminded her how big she actually was. David pulled Maya aside, his expression serious now. "Listen, I need to talk to you about what just happened. That customer, Richard Pemberton, he was completely out of line. The way he treated you all evening, and then that challenge with the piano. I should have intervened sooner." "It's okay," Maya said, and surprisingly, she meant it. "It's not okay," David insisted. "The way he spoke to you, the way he treated you like an object for his amusement. That's not what this restaurant stands for." He paused. "I'm going to make sure he knows that." Before Maya could respond, David was walking toward Richard's table with purposeful strides. The restaurant fell quiet again, sensing drama. David stood over Richard, and while Maya couldn't hear the exact words, she could see the manager's stern expression, could see Richard's face growing redder. After a moment, David returned with something in his hand. A bill. He presented it to Richard with formal courtesy. "Your check, sir. You'll notice we've added a mandatory service appreciation fee. 25% added to your total. For Maya." Richard's face went from red to purple. "That's outrageous." "I'm not paying extra for then I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave and not return," David said calmly. "Le Cheval Blanc has a strict policy about respecting our staff. You violated that policy multiple times this evening. The fee is non-negotiable." The restaurant was dead silent, every eye on this confrontation. Richard looked around, perhaps hoping for support, but found only cold stares and crossed arms. Even his own friends wouldn't meet his eyes. He threw his credit card on the table with a sharp snap. "Fine, but I'll be speaking to the owner about this. About you. About all of this." "The owner is my uncle," David said pleasantly. "I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear about how one of our guests tried to humiliate our staff for entertainment. In fact, I believe there are now several videos of the incident circulating online. Shall I show him those as well?" Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He said nothing more, just signed the bill with angry, jagged strokes and stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Without a word to anyone, without looking at Maya, he strode toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the quiet restaurant. As the door closed behind him, the restaurant erupted in applause once more. But this time it wasn't just for Maya's performance. It was for justice, for seeing cruelty answered with consequences, for witnessing someone who'd tried to make another person small get exactly what he deserved. Lisa hugged Maya tightly. "I can't believe that just happened. Any of it. You were incredible. I mean, I knew you were nice and everything, but I had no idea you were like genius-level talented." David pressed an envelope into Maya's hands. "That's your share of his bill, including the service fee. And Maya, take tomorrow off. Paid. You've earned it." Maya looked down at the envelope, then at James Chen's business card still clutched in her other hand. Her entire life had just changed in the span of 20 minutes. Everything she thought she knew about her future, about who she was, about what was possible, had been turned upside down. Other diners approached throughout the rest of the evening, wanting to talk to her, to congratulate her, to share that they'd captured the moment and posted it online. The hashtags were already trending. Waitress genius, piano justice, hidden talent. By the time Maya's shift officially ended, her phone had dozens of notifications. Friend requests from strangers. Messages from music teachers she'd studied with years ago who'd seen the videos. Reporters asking for interviews. The video of her performance had been viewed over 100,000 times and was still climbing. As she changed out of her uniform in the staff room, Maya caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different somehow. Her eyes were brighter, her posture straighter. For the first time in 10 years, she looked like someone who had something to say and the courage to say it. She pulled out her phone and stared at James Chen's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. Fear whispered in her ear, all the old doubts. What if she failed the audition? What if tonight was a fluke? What if she couldn't actually do this? But louder than the fear was the memory of how it felt to play again, the rightness of it, the joy, the sense of coming home to herself. Maya pressed the call button. It rang twice before James answered. "I'd like to audition," she said. "When can I come in?" 3 days after that night at Le Cheval Blanc, Maya stood outside the New York Philharmonic building, staring up at its imposing facade. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was anticipation mixed with disbelief that she was actually here. The video of her performance had exploded online. Over 2 million views in 72 hours. News outlets had picked up the story. Waitress silences arrogant millionaire with stunning piano performance. The narrative had captured people's imagination. Everyone loved a story about hidden talent revealed, about the underdog getting their moment, about karma delivered through beauty rather than revenge. Maya's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Interview requests from morning shows, messages from music schools, offers from wedding planners who wanted to hire her. It was overwhelming. But she'd ignored most of it, focusing on just one thing: preparing for this audition. She'd gone to the community room in her apartment building and played for 8 hours straight. Her fingers had been stiff at first, but gradually everything came back. Muscle memory was a strange and wonderful thing. The years melted away and she was 17 again, preparing for Juilliard, believing anything was possible. Inside the Philharmonic building, James Chen greeted her warmly. "You came. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't," Maya admitted. "About a dozen times on the subway ride here I almost turned around." James smiled. "But you didn't. That's what matters." He led her down a hallway lined with photographs of legendary conductors and soloists. The concert series I mentioned is called Rediscovered Voices. It's specifically for musicians who, for whatever reason, stepped away from performing but deserve to be heard. Your story fits perfectly. They entered a rehearsal space with a beautiful grand piano waiting under soft lights. 2 other people sat in chairs along the wall, a woman with kind eyes who James introduced as the program director, and a stern-looking older man who was the orchestra's principal conductor. "Whenever you're ready," James said, settling into his seat. Maya approached the piano. This was different from playing in the restaurant. There, she'd been fueled by anger and hurt, and the need to prove something to a cruel man. Here, the only person she needed to prove anything to was herself. She sat down and let her hands rest on the keys. She thought about her mother, about the sacrifices Patricia had made so her daughter could pursue music, about how her mother had never complained, never made Maya feel guilty for the money spent on lessons and sheet music and competition fees, about how even on her deathbed Patricia had told Maya that her gift was precious and shouldn't be wasted. Maya played Chopin again, but this time the Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was technically more challenging than the Nocturne, emotionally more complex. She poured everything into it, all the grief she'd been carrying, all the lost years, all the hope that maybe it wasn't too late to reclaim something she thought was gone forever. When she finished, there was silence. Maya looked up nervously, trying to read their expressions. The stern conductor was wiping his eyes. The program director had her hand pressed over her heart, and James was smiling the biggest smile Maya had ever seen. "You're in," he said simply. "If you want it, the spot is yours." Maya's vision blurred with tears. "I want it." Over the following weeks, Maya's life transformed so completely it felt like she'd stepped through a doorway into an alternate reality. She gave her notice at Le Cheval Blanc, though David insisted on throwing her a farewell party, where the entire staff cheered and several customers she'd served over the years came to congratulate her. The concert series was scheduled for 6 months out, which gave Maya time to prepare. James connected her with a piano teacher, a legendary instructor who'd trained multiple competition winners. She practiced 6, sometimes 8 hours a day, her fingers regaining their strength and flexibility, her musical understanding deepening with maturity. The internet hadn't forgotten about her. The original video continued to circulate, spawning articles and discussions about talent hiding in plain sight, about how we often overlook the people serving us. Several organizations reached out, wanting to feature her story. Maya agreed to a few interviews, hoping her experience might inspire someone else who'd given up on their dreams. In one interview that went particularly viral, the reporter asked about Richard Pemberton. Do you have any message for the man who challenged you to play that night? Maya had thought about this carefully. It would be easy to be bitter, to condemn him for his cruelty, but that night had changed her life. Without his mockery, she might never have sat at that piano. I'd thank him, she said honestly, not for how he treated me, but for accidentally giving me back something I'd lost. He meant to humiliate me, but instead he freed me. Sometimes our biggest breakthroughs come from our worst moments. The interview clip was shared millions of times with people praising her grace and maturity. Maya became more than just a viral video. She became a symbol of resilience, of hidden potential, of second chances. Richard Pemberton, meanwhile, had discovered that cruelty in the age of social media came with consequences. His real estate firm faced backlash as the video circulated. Several deals fell through. Business partners distanced themselves. He issued a public apology eventually, carefully worded by lawyers, but the damage to his reputation was done. Maya didn't follow any of that closely. She was too busy preparing for the concert, too focused on the music. She'd wasted 10 years being invisible. She didn't want to waste another moment on anger. The night of her debut performance arrived with surprising speed. Maya stood backstage at David Geffen Hall, the Philharmonic's home, listening to the orchestra warm up. The concert hall seated over 2,000 people, and according to James, every ticket had sold out within hours of going on sale. She wore a simple but elegant black dress. Her hair was styled professionally, her makeup done by someone who knew what they were doing. She looked like a different person from the waitress who'd served tables just months ago. But inside she was still Maya, still carrying her mother's memory, still that 4-year-old girl who'd fallen in love with sound. James found her in the wings. There are some special guests here tonight I thought you should know about. Your old teacher from Detroit, Mrs. Chen. She flew in specifically to see you, and about 30 of your former classmates from the School of Arts organized a group trip. Maya's eyes filled with tears. They're here? Front row, James confirmed. And Maya? There's one more thing. He handed her a program. Look at the dedication. Maya opened it and read the words printed there. This performance is dedicated to the memory of Patricia Johnson, who believed in the power of dreams and sacrifices everything to nurture her daughter's gift. How did you know? Maya whispered. You told me about your mother during one of our planning meetings. I thought she should be honored. Maya couldn't speak. She just hugged James, this man who'd seen her potential and given her a chance. The stage manager gave the 5-minute warning. Maya walked to the wings and peeked out at the audience. The massive hall was packed, every seat filled. She could see her former classmates in the front row, could see Mrs. Chen dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, could see faces of all ages, all backgrounds, all there to hear her play. The lights dimmed. The conductor walked out to applause, then gestured toward the wings. This was it. Maya walked onto the stage and the applause was thunderous. She saw people standing, saw camera flashes, saw smiles and tears and excitement. These people didn't see a waitress. They saw a pianist, an artist, someone who deserved to be there. She sat at the piano, this magnificent instrument on this legendary stage, and felt the rightness of it settle over her like a blessing. This was where she was supposed to be, not despite the last 10 years, but because of them. The pain and loss had deepened her playing, given her something to say that she couldn't have said at 17. Maya played that night like she'd never played before. She performed Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto with the full orchestra, the piece she'd played with the Detroit Symphony as a child. But she wasn't a child anymore. She was a woman who'd lost everything and found it again, who'd been broken and rebuilt herself, who'd learned that it's never too late to reclaim your truth. The performance was transcendent. Critics would later call it one of the finest interpretations they'd heard in years. The audience gave her 3 standing ovations. People wept openly. And when it was over, when the final notes faded and Maya stood to bow, she looked up at the lights and silently said, I did it, Mama. I finally did it. In the months that followed, Maya's career took off. She was invited to perform with orchestras across the country. Record labels reached out with contract offers. She was invited to teach master classes at Juilliard, the school she'd once turned down. But Maya never forgot where she'd come from. She established a scholarship fund in her mother's name for talented young musicians from low-income families, ensuring that financial hardship wouldn't steal anyone else's dreams. She gave free concerts at community centers in underserved neighborhoods, bringing classical music to people who might never otherwise hear it. She stayed in touch with Lisa and David and the others from Le Cheval Blanc. Sometimes she'd visit the restaurant, though now she entered through the front door as a guest.